an outreach tactics for a hummingbird world. We have Francois Goube, Laurence O'Toole, Cindy Krum, Bill Slawski, and Dominic. I've forgotten your surname, I'm sorry. Dominic Woodman. Brilliant stuff. Francois, you work for OnCrawl. You are OnCrawl. You founded OnCrawl. Is that correct?
Yeah, right. Thanks for joining us, guys. Feel free to ask questions, so it can be a great discussion between you and us. And feel free to say it in French if you want, and I can translate it. So feel free to do it.
Brilliant stuff. Francois, Laurence, Greedy Man owns two companies, two SEO companies. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm the founder of, well, I own Analytics SEO, we own the Authoritas SEO and content marketing platform, and we also acquired LinkDex last year, so we have two SEO platforms. So we are big into data, clustering, competitive analysis.
Right, big fan of big data. Now, I'll ask you a question, who's your best client?
Probably there's a guy called, I can't remember his name, Jason Barnard, yeah.
It is a great platform. I use their API, and it's absolutely brilliant.
Thanks.
Next up is Cindy, who we met yesterday. Anybody who was there. Brilliant lady, talks about fraggles, fragments, and handles. Do I win a mug? Do I win a mug? That was the mug question yesterday.
Yeah, of course you do.
Thank you very much. And you're over from America?
From Denver, Colorado, like Vail, Breckenridge, Keystone.
Super. Now, I'll ask Bill about the geography, because I was getting it all wrong this morning. Denver's in Colorado. Colorado isn't next to Nevada. Brilliant. Bill's over from California, which isn't next to Nevada either, or it is? It is. Oh. Everybody says the Americans don't have good knowledge of geography, but actually it's the English. Lovely to see you, Bill. We met you yesterday. It was a really good talk from Bill. One of the great minds of SEO, in my opinion, Cindy too, Laurence on big data, and Dominic, who I met this morning, another great mind of SEO. Yeah, great stuff. And you work for Distilled.
Yeah, senior consultant. That will help. Senior consultant for Distilled. Yeah, did a lot of split testing. Yeah. Background in web development. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I love Distilled too. I talked to Will Critchlow about the split testing. Sales funnel. Brilliant stuff. Right, let's get going. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being here. We start with the first question. Bill, you wrote to me in an email, it is no longer about pages and links, but rather about entities and relationships. Can you explain?
Okay, so in 2012, Google introduced the knowledge graph. They'd been working on it for many years before then. The idea was a focus less upon matching keywords in a query to keywords on pages, and focusing more on returning the information about things, people, places, and things that people wanted to learn about. If they were able to index that information better, regardless of the language people used, and capture the meaning instead, they would have happier searchers.
Brilliant stuff. And how does that affect our content strategy and outreach?
I had an SEO campaign with a client. The city of Baltimore has a visitor centers. They wanted people to visit the city. We were tasked with optimizing a page for Baltimore's Black history. They have lots of famous colleges, churches, and people who live there. And we just put the words on the page, Black history. We got very little traction. We were having a hard time ranking better than 100. There were lots of other pages we were competing with. I turned my copywriter and I suggested writing a page that provided a walking tour of the city of Baltimore, where people can see some of the churches, some of the schools. There's a 9-foot-tall statue of Billie Holiday. And there are townhomes that Frederick Douglass bought when he was in his 60s that are still standing and people visit and want to see. So we figured if the purpose of the site was to get people to visit Baltimore, we'd give them something to see, give them a chance to walk around, see these statues, search for these people. And it went from a page that had a hard time ranking well to a page that was the 6th most visited page on the site within 3 months or so. Because we tried focusing upon entities, upon people, upon places. We gave people what they wanted. We applied searches for meaning, for individuals, and that made a difference.
Yeah, so things not strings. Francois.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that. Do you think, guys, that let's say you want to rank for iPhone XS, and do you think you need to build a content strategy with co-occurrency, so we've got the entity as a product, which is the iPhone, and should you recommend to add stuff about Steve Jobs, which is who was the founder of Apple, talk about Apple, talk about iOS, which can be identified as an entity because it's a software. And Google knows those relationships. So would you recommend that co-occurrency of those relationships? If you want to rank for iPhone, you need to add in your content other related entities?
I'm a believer in building semantic topic models when you create pages and using frequently co-occurring words that appear on other pages that rank well for the term that you're interested in. Because if you're a copywriter, you do that naturally anyway. You see what else is out there in the world that exists that covers these types of things, and you say, oh, they cover this and this and that. I should include those on my page too.
I'm going to disagree a little bit. I think that talking about Steve Jobs on a page that's about the history of the iPhone and not the iPhone XS, that would make sense if you're doing a history of the iPhone, but if you're trying to sell a specific phone, the related topics would be more about features and benefits that people might also be searching for, because Google cares about searcher intent. And if Google divides the world in, I want to go, I want to know, I want to do, I want to buy. And if you're trying to sell an iPhone XS, they want to buy, and that's about features and benefits. If you want to know history, that's a totally different process and a different intent signal.
I'd just like
to go back on that real quick. Someone searches for pizza during lunch. They don't want a history of pizza. They want food.
So separate pages, maybe on the site and links, but yeah, not the same page.
Well, just picking up on that point, I think the point you made about the history of Baltimore and the black history was just you putting it in context and putting a story and a narrative around something. And I think for me, what I've seen, and certainly even the last 2 weeks, there's new research guides appearing in the SERPs in the UK. I don't know whether anyone's seen those. On the e-commerce, buy pram, buy pushchair, buy wardrobe, you're getting these research guides, is you put that in context. So I would be building the best content around iPhone XS, how to use it, what's its features, why it differs from Samsung, a complete buying guide to it and related models in a structured fashion, trying to use the data that you said in a semantic way.
One thing, though, on that is that what I've seen in my research is that the buying guides are often, to rank, have to be on a third-party site that's not selling.
Well, I mean, examples from last week, yeah. I mean, last week, my wife thinks I'm having another baby, so I keep researching buying prams and things. But, you know, for their mother care, amazing buying guide, really well structured, thinking about every aspect. And not just, they've got, you know, like people also ask questions, but they're answering the branded questions as well. So they rank really well for things like Isofix car seats. And as well as the independent and consumer report sites, so you're seeing a mixture.
I don't know Mother Care.
So
they're
a big bricks and mortar retailer. So, but they've got their e-commerce site, and within the e-commerce site is very well integrated. So when you search for an e-commerce product, you get buying guides coming in the search results as well as the actual products. So it's really nicely integrated. So they're appearing in these new research guide features alongside the independent and newspaper reviews on how to buy prams and which is like consumer reports in the States.
Okay.
So somebody pointed out these sites to me this week, and they remind me of a patent from Google that says they're going to look at online reviews from different sources and enhance what they know about entities that are mentioned in those reviews, because a lot of times those reviews will contain information that the entities don't share with the world. And they enhance that they provide perceptions that the company doesn't necessarily want to point out. You know, your reputation may be about you, but it doesn't belong to you, and it's not built by you.
Quick, I suppose, side question to you all then. When we're talking about, let's say that Steve Jobs is relevant for an iPhone history, but not for an iPhone product page. But there's obviously like a level of granularity here, because if Steve Jobs has, obviously now he's dead, but hypothetically where he's still alive and had just talked specifically about one feature that he was endorsing, almost certainly that would have come up in the reviews, and that's a thing that, you know, there's a set of subtlety here that is outside of just like, I can just do this one thing. And when you get into products, right, and you go, okay, like the classic question that you have here as a retailer is, I obviously have an iPhone review page. Let's use cars actually, because I'm a bit more familiar with cars. But you know, I obviously have a car review page, and I review the Ford. But do I also have a page for reviewing Ford's driving experience? Do I also have a page, because that could very plausibly, that's a bunch of related entities. You would expect the driving experience to come up on the main car page because it's kind of related. Same thing if you have the internal, kind of the interior of the car, the stats about the car, the miles per gallon. Like, should you have one on just statistics about the car, the boot size, the trunk size, interior dimensions? And all of these could plausibly be their own pages, but they're also related entities that could sit on the same page that would kind of bump it there. And I guess, you know, when we do it, we end up we will end up looking at how Google has ended up, we'll basically Google a bunch of these things kind of en masse and try and decide how it's segmenting, how we think it's segmenting those topics. And so, like, you know, if you'll see, does it basically rank well existing pages on this, how am I going to rephrase this? Basically, do a bunch of pages already exist and rank well specifically for exterior dimensions of a car? And if they do, then we'll probably go, okay, there's enough here for this to be its own unique page. Google is clearly rewarding this. We can probably buy into that. Like, the safest play in that case is just to play in what already exists. And I'm guessing, what is your own experiences with that model and how you put in what and where you kind of draw the line?
I was just specifically talking about autos. We did big research for someone who's quite big in that sector, and there's a French guy who's not here, I don't think, called Laurence, and we have, every time I meet him, he talks about the smell of the SERP, which is, every time I mention it to a client, they go, do you have to describe it that way? But we call it the SERP landscape. So what does, you know, if you look at across thousands of keywords, hundreds of thousands of keywords in a sector across the whole industry, and then you cluster them into topics, that's fine, but then you need to look at who's ranking for those pages and what does it smell like. So best family cars, you look at Google and, you know, around the people also ask, and maybe a direct answer, you have got article, long form content, really descriptive. You look at something which is a review or comparison, you get different types of sites. You get what I call content snippets, which are a mixture of sort of brief bits of types of cars for sale and more content. And if you do something like used, buy, white car, blue mini, you're getting listing sites of cars selling. So the smell of the SERP, I'm sure we can come up with something better than that. But
I've heard UX designers refer to that as the scent of information.
Okay, that's probably nicer.
But it also fits in. What I hear you saying is that different kinds of searches generate totally different types of companies ranking, and I think that fits in a bit with the micro moments of do they want to go, no, do, or buy.
Yeah, and that's my point about competitive analysis. Is ever since Hummingbird is, you know, I call it the Venn diagram problem, that SEOs, and maybe you can have a show of hands here, but how many people are still tracking, I don't know, 1,000 keywords, 10,000 keywords, whatever it might be, and then tracking visibility against their top 5 competitors. And the market's not like that. You know, you are competing with thousands of different businesses in different, I mean, I'm talking about big brands here especially, as opposed to local businesses, but, you know, so there's thousands of micro niches. And what you can see when you cluster data at scale is that you can see that there are some authorities. So I use Mothercare as an example. They are an absolute authority on buying goods for babies, but they're not an authority on every aspect of that. And there are other niches where you can compete with them if you so choose, but you've got to pick your battles. But the old approach of looking at keywords and looking at Venn diagrams and looking at how many, you know, competitor A has got and B has got and how many you haven't got. I mean, that's limited in approach.
So interesting question here, I suppose, right? If I'm a large company, let's say Fortune 10 company, or Fortune 500, do you think that clustering is like, I suppose, how do you present that in a way that is understandable and gettable by a large audience, right? I think a lot of the reason that people use 10,000 keywords and they sit there and they track it is because they're competing, on a very product and an industry level with a set of, revenues. They have a certain set of competitors. And that's why they're kind of targeting and picking that focus. And the thing with sort of big clustering stuff is that often, in my experience, it can either get wishy-washy or it can just be way too much. And what I end up caring more about is I just need someone to take an action off this. And if I can jump to the same conclusion from 2,000 keywords and we're moving in roughly the right direction, and really all the other stuff was just me blowing through my time because...
Well, I think that you can answer that, and it's just by having the right data and mashing it up and looking at it in a multi-dimensional way. So you can, let's say traditionally you look at where I rank and what's the potential visibility based on my ranking on some click-through rate curve. But then you could model into that, rather than looking at a keyword, you're looking at a cluster and a topic area or an intent, and then you're looking at, okay, so what's the potential? And also, what URLs have I got that fall into that, and how much traffic have they got? So, what's the potential? And hang on a second, how much do they make? How much money do I make from organic? On that in terms of I don't know, a number of euros per organic conversion. And so you can model that, and I think you can also then segment it based on the way. So, if you're Walmart in the States, you've got 30 brand managers looking after every single one of your verticals. Then you slice and dice the data that way as well. So you can turn it both ways. So you can see what the data shows you, see how Google's sort of, clustering topics in your market, but then look at it the way you do as a business as well.
I think there's an opportunity there to actually have some conversations with salespeople, with customer service people, and see what people are interested in. Do some social listening and see what people are talking about, what jargon they're using, what language they expect to see on your web pages. It's going to help inform a lot of those decisions.
I suppose a lot of e-commerce sites will, as a proxy for that, they'll use internal site search as a source of data. We haven't done any clustering of that data. We're always using external data, but I mean that might be quite interesting. And then you supplement that. People also ask, and you mine Google's people also ask questions. I don't know how many of you have noticed, but I mean, you just keep clicking on those people also ask, and more come up. And eventually, after approximately 30 or so, it'll go a bit off topic. But it gives you some great ideas for your content editors on what to write.
So those people also ask questions are often mined from a question graph that's generated from query logs. So they're crowdsourcing.
Google searching its internal search.
Right.
Yeah, just a quick comment to jump on what you said, Cindy, about the search intent. I believe that when it comes to entity, you need also to tackle the search intent issues, because there are different types of SERPs, and let's say let's think it this way. You are analyzing the shopping mission of a guy who wants to buy a new smartphone. So he's asking Google, what's the size of the screen of the iPhone X? And so he's starting to learn about new smartphones. And then, so you have an instant answer actually when you are typing that on Google. So you've got directly the answer, and there's a website ranking for that answer. And then during the shopping mission, the guy is querying like, what's the difference between an iPhone X and Pixel 3? And then you get another type of SERPs. And those queries are informational. So keep in mind the search intent. So there's another type of SERP where your Google is comparing for you with aggregate reviews, for instance, those two models of smartphone. And again, let's go further in the shopping mission. He wants to buy, So he's typing best deal for Pixel 3. And then you've got another type of SERP because Google is trying to answer another search intent, which is transactional. So with that in mind, regarding content strategy, do you think that SEOs need to apply different strategy based on the shopping mission and what the story you're telling to your customers and how you want to bring them to having the idea of a new phone and then to buy it? Do you think we need as SEO to build all that journey of the shopping mission and apply that type of content strategy? Do you recommend that for an e-commerce vendor, for instance?
I have thoughts on this. Number one, Google is getting better at questions, of course. We've talked about this for both days. They're getting better at questions, but they're also getting better at implied questions. So for instance, if I search for best pram for twins, then the what is the best pram for twins is implied, right? And it used to be, if you're searching for something that's less of a product, like you search for a brand, if you search for a brand, you will either get the knowledge graph, or if you search for what is brand, you might get knowledge graph, or it's a good way to test for featured snippets and answers. So you have to start thinking that Google is using all of these questions to machine learn when people imply keywords that they don't even search for. And so that might tweak how you're tracking keywords and how you're targeting keywords. But the other thing in terms of product journey that I think is absolutely a game changer that no one's talked about yet on this stage is the Merchant Center product feed, where you used to have product PLAs that you had to pay for, and they occur in a carousel at the top, and they get a lot of clicks. Those PLA carousels get way more clicks than regular PPC does, especially in mobile, and they're more common in mobile. But now you can send an XML document of all of your products with all the specs included, the iPhone XS or Prams or whatever. Send them with all of the data and the features and stuff like that well marked up. And you get a gorgeous carousel with expanders and sideways arrows, down arrows. It takes up a whole thing, and it's displacing whatever was ranking #1 with something on the phone that takes up more than half the screen sometimes.
And sites that hadn't been using those, like Amazon, have started using.
They're catching up. They've had to scramble and throw together the XML feed because they weren't paying for the PLAs, but they'll do it for free for sure.
Yeah.
So there's another interesting point here, which is that there's a difference between if I am literally making the iPhone, if I am Apple, and if I am someone trying to resell said iPhone. Right? If I'm Apple, I might as well, to Cindy's earlier point, it's probably easiest for me to dominate a lot of this consumer journey by just turning up with whoever ranks there. Like, I just don't really, there's going to be a cut taken, and yes, in theory, I probably make a little bit of a premium if they buy directly through my own website. But a lot of this is, like, depending on the expertise of your company, often if you are that more product company, you lack that kind of digital expertise, and frankly, it's a play to your strengths game. And if you can more easily get, if the classic example I heard of this was, if TechRadar has 2 reviewers and one of them loves iPhones, he fucking loves every iPhone. It doesn't matter what iPhone you give him, he's getting 5 stars. That's the guy that you send the free iPhone to, and that's the guy that you link to. You don't try and get Apple's page to rank for it. You just send all your links to the one guy on TechRadar who's giving you the good review, and you just try and silence and get rid of the other one. Like a far more practical of just basically wherever your brand is already strong, you can kind of play to that, as opposed to if you're a reseller or if you're a review site in whatever part of this process, you kind of just have to get in where you can, get in where you already have that strength.
I'll add on, though, that you want that guy's review more than you want that he loves the iPhone, more than you want Steve Jobs saying that he loves the iPhone, right? Because
yeah, completely agree.
Biased. I had a question to move on a little bit about content. I mean, we were talking earlier on about different pages for different aspects of a product or a town. Cindy, you and your Fraggles come back quite often in my conversations. Does that mean, do Fraggles mean we can actually not split it into pages so much and write longer content and expect Google to soon just be able to scroll down to it like they are on AMP?
In the future, yes. Now, not quite yet. I think that the idea of Fraggles is getting us closer to a world where web and app and JavaScript app and PLA and SPA are all, I know that's a lot of letters, all indexed as equal competitors. And if you think about a single page app that's all JavaScript, all on one URL, Google wants to index that. It's just that they haven't been able to. So they've been telling us to break things out into separate URLs. That's their problem. And we've been a crutch doing what they need to index it, but it was a crutch. It wasn't actually necessary for consumers. It was just necessary for Google because they weren't very good at indexing JavaScript. Now that they've gotten better at indexing JavaScript, gotten better at indexing pieces of pages within, because that's what a Fraggle indexing is indexing a piece of a page as a separate entity or a separate idea than this piece of a page, indexing micro parts of a page separately. That's why they would do that, is to index things that are long feeds, like an app is essentially, when Google crawls an index, is one big log feed without separate URLs. So they've got to figure that out, and that's where we're going. It's not a strategy that I necessarily, like, I'm not like, hey, you know what's great for ranking is a single page app. No, not right now. But that's what Google wants to get to.
I've seen patents that talk about a block level indexing of pages. Bing maybe does it better than Google does, but okay, so if you have like a magazine article with a bunch of reviews of restaurants, each paragraph is a new review of a new restaurant. Google will try to segment those, and they'll try to individually capture the essence of what's said in those paragraphs as if they were separate pages, without them being separate pages. Now, Microsoft has introduced something where they refer to a block level page rank, where they may rank parts of pages differently than other parts, and they may try to understand what each part of a page is based upon linguistic features of that page, whether or not that block has full sentences with punctuation, or whether it's all single word hyperlinks, or all titled. They try to understand what is contained on an actual web page and how it may be distinct. When you have news pages, they have lots of different articles that may be on different subjects, and it's ideal to be able to segment those and tell the difference between them.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that has interesting implications, especially in e-commerce, where I don't know how many e-commerce, show of hands, e-commerce site owners here. How many of you guys are on your category pages have got all that nice paragraph of text at the bottom of the category page? You know, and you know, how long is it, if that's doing any good, and then how long is it going to be doing any good for? And so, you know, for me, you know, I wouldn't be doing that right now. I'd be investing in buying guides that drive people into those pages, or trying to surface more content on that page in a legitimate way, because Google can see straight through that.
Yeah, I'll agree. And I'll add on to what Bill was saying about block level indexing. Don't underestimate the importance of Google and Bing launching the indexing APIs that can get content in or out of their indexes. They both follow like the same formatting of the API. Don't underestimate that, because right now it's still based on URLs, but it doesn't have to be. Like in the long term, especially if you have Fraggles that Google's assigned, or if you have named anchors or jump links that you've put into your page, jump links all of a sudden are getting indexed in a way that they haven't been for a long time. And if you think about an SPA, a single page app that's just a long string of JavaScript, how would you find a specific piece? Maybe a named anchor or a jump link. And if we soon get to send these named anchors or jump links or Fraggle IDs to, which doesn't exist, I just made that up, but it could. If you could send those in an API, how great would that be for everyone that's making SPAs and heavy JavaScript stuff? And also know that Google's doubled down on PWAs, progressive web apps, and many PWAs are built as SPAs. They're built with only one URL, but Google has whole conferences all about how to build these JavaScript-heavy websites. So they must have a plan. And I'll tell you, they do have a plan. I can give you details later.
Some fun stuff on the, I suppose on the opposite of don't underestimate, of don't necessarily overestimate. I have done so many tests on that irritating block of SEO content at the bottom of the category page, desperately wanting to believe that it did not matter, and sometimes it did matter in a really horrible thing where I would sort of throw it out and be like, guys, we could do this and we'll do it and then we don't have to invest money in it and you can spend more money on us. And that's really probably the best place to spend your money. And then we would do it and sometimes it would do nothing at all and other times it would add, a couple ones, anywhere between like 5 to 7% additional traffic. Separate from e-commerce, same kind of thing if you flipped onto like landing pages. If you were in travel is the obvious like big aggregator, but any sort of like big business that says it's not an affiliate, but technically its entire business model is an affiliate, like Skyscanner. Any of those big landing pages there, again, in those ones we've seen that it really is just like you kind of just have to test the content because some of them have been really successful and we've rolled it out and it's been really, really large wins. I think often, at some cases, because we've got feature snippets, but in other cases, it's done absolutely nothing at all. So to be honest, my only advice here is try it, because every time I've tried to recommend something on it, I've been wrong.
Well, I think that's a good point. I think it's just, it's like anything else, you've got to test stuff, especially if you want to do stuff at scale. Make sure you don't lose your job by recommending something that loses a company millions. But my question on that was just, how long will that practice last, really, and those techniques? Because to me, that's keyword stuffing. Again, so,
it's
Google don't
crutch.
like that.
It's a crutch that we've been using to help Google at a job that they're not very good at, right?
Yeah, no, completely. It's just, it is exactly that. It's a crutch, and I keep thinking it's gone away, and then I go and check, and I'm like, it's still not gone away.
Google may heal thyself, right? Like, Google may get there. That's, I think. But you're saying pragmatically right now?
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. It will almost certainly get there. It's pragmatically every time I try to avoid getting there, I end up being wrong. I suppose the other really interesting thing that I'd be interested in people's thoughts on is I feel like if you are a big company, the way that they've tried to deal with people like Google automatizing content and pulling everything out is everyone is vertically integrating. So Skyscanner, you can now pay through Skyscanner. If you look at someone like the property market, it's moved from just find a property to like, let me manage your move, let me deal with the contracts, let me get you in. If you look at LinkedIn, the way that they're trying to deal with Google jobs floating into the space is they're trying to shunt further up and just get in straight with the recruiters and take the job feeds. Like, what do you think is a good response depending on your site? Like, these are obviously very large companies that can do those things. What do you think is the correct response for, or what are the options for companies aside from vertical integration to kind of work with this? Is it just work with it and that's where we're stuck at?
I can only answer that where we work with one classified site I'm sure you've all heard of, which is massive and covers a breadth of categories, and you just can't do it all. So what I was saying earlier, you just got to pick your battles where you think you're going to win and get the best return. Whether that's in one particular vertical, which they probably focused on, or across a couple of verticals. I think that's just what I will say is just do your research, really understand at a granular level what the competition's like, what Google's looking for, and how that fits into making money.
I'll say that it's a good question that I don't have a good answer for, but I will say that the strategy that they're using when they vertically integrate like that, they learned from the best, because that's what Google and Facebook do. They try and keep you on the property, because if they lose you to another property, even just to pay or something else, then they may have lost you forever. When they can control the environment, they can track it beginning to end and know more about you and market to you better later.
Let's all make browsers.
No, that was brilliant. I really enjoyed that discussion. I know that Francois wanted to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence.
Oh, well, yeah. As our job as SEO is evolving, do you think, guys, like, there are plenty of sources regarding named entities. You can use Wikidata, stuff like that. Do you think that companies need to retrieve that kind of data and try to build something on top of that. Let me give you an example. For instance, let's say your classifieds website. So you have tons of ads about some products, a chair, a car, some places, because you have some renting ads on that website. Do you think that we can leverage from grabbing Wikidata and the relation between entities to, for instance, apply it regarding our internal linking structure to organize the website this way, the way Google is probably interpreting the relationship between entities? Do you think that this can be a great strategy, or what's your thoughts?
It's certainly an interesting strategy and something that's on our roadmap to do, which is to play with user graph database, which we use SERP data, but we don't store it in a MySQL. Well, we do store it in a MySQL database for normal ranking reports. But if you look at it in a graph, you understand the relationships better, and you can find the communities. You run a community detection algorithm, you can find the communities. I think you could do the same with the relationships in a graph from Wikidata. So go to linkdata.org and you could use any graph database, but it's quite hard to do at scale. But you could find a good engineer that could do that. But even at I would say the biggest problem for those kind of sites is the poor data that comes in. It's unstructured, but it's if that data if you could on the way in encourage users to help you structure the data in the right way, so that you could do a nice JSON LD formatted data, you actually really would be telling Google from the get-go what this data is all around, and you'd be making suggestions which would help you structure the pages in the right way. So I might be inclined to come at it the other way.
And do you think that we can predict that we will automate organizing the architecture based on that data? Are we going to a more automated SEO? What's your thought about that?
Formatting things to fit an API is necessarily standardizing all aspects of the web. So yes, I think to some degree things are getting organized around what Google can and can't understand.
There's an issue with building something on a web scale that requires something like a Google to be able to extract entities from pages, recognize that they're nouns, recognize that they're brands, products, places, understand what classifications they might have and what properties might be associated with them, create confidence levels in facts that may be properties that they may possess. And if they can look at a wide area of the web and see those facts reappearing, they can build a confidence level that maybe avoids a need for fact checkers.
A question now about language. Dominic was talking to me earlier on about the idea that Google's getting better and better at understanding language. The fact that it's getting better at it means that we hopefully won't need to worry so much about the content of our text in an SEO manner, and we can write more naturally. Dominic, can you expand on that?
Yes, I suppose this was in theory the idea that as it got better at understanding things, you would have to work less hard to make it understand things. I suspect what I've kind of seen in practice, and I suppose I'd be interested to everyone else's opinion, is that when you used to be able to spam a lot, the advice was actually quite simple. It was spam a lot. And then as it got a little bit harder, it was like, okay, the spam isn't working quite as much now, but it's not good enough to have just worked it out when you write naturally. So you hit this sort of midpoint in the middle where you actually now had to think quite a lot about how you were writing it, because you couldn't just spam anymore, but also it wasn't good enough to get you all the way there. And I suppose as to advice on doing it, the best article I've read on this is actually by a guy called Justin Briggs. He wrote a fantastic article that I would highly recommend Googling and looking up, because I don't remember what it's called, but it's something about, it's about NLP and language, and he's a very practical article. He has like 10 articles on his blog, and they're all brilliant. Go read all of them. But go read that one first, and it kind of talks at a more practical point of view about how complex sentence structures could confuse a computer, and how you could go through that. And the more practical version of that is, we've seen with like featured snippets. You've seen examples where Google has, it tries to, if you put in like a query that would want an opinion, what is an opinion, which is the best phone or something. If it pulls up a featured snippet, sometimes it will give you like a pro ... con, because it's had to pull them from 2 separate places in the text. And it was a case of it going, okay, I understand there's one thing here and there's one thing here, and I've successfully pulled that from the text. And we saw a lot of success in just taking those 2 sentences and smushing them together so Google could basically go, oh, I get it. This is one sentence that neatly summarizes both the pros and the cons, and then you would see that just move in and take the feature snippet. So there was a nice kind of like, it felt like that was one of the more like measurable things that you could look at and go, I can feel it, like it understanding what I'm doing and where I'm trying to get to.
Sorry, Cindy, you had an example from Wikipedia where Google had pulled 2 separate sentences from the middle of the text and put it in a featured snippet, which is getting pretty, if I may say, jiggy with your Fraggles and your NLP.
Yeah, exactly. They seem to understand sentences enough that in featured snippets, they're taking parts of 2 paragraphs that are nearby each other, but omitting the part that doesn't actually answer the question, and lifting the sentences that do answer the question. And so that speaks to a pretty high level of understanding, a pretty high level of confidence in their understanding, especially in English. I think that outside of English, and especially outside of the 10, soon 39 languages that are included in the natural language API, they'll struggle more. They just won't be able to do that at all. But especially in English and the larger languages where they have a lot of machine learning data, then they can do this. We've done some fun testing with languages where we tried to see if Google understands idioms, because idioms are language-specific sayings that don't actually make sense when you translate them literally. And so we did some testing for, does Google understand the phrase, put yourself in my shoes? Because we don't, in that phrase, you're not actually suggesting anyone take off their shoes. And so we can check in Google Translate, does Google Translate translate this to put yourself in my place? Or does Google Translate the word shoes, right? And unless the idiom is spoken the same way in every language, it shouldn't say shoes, it should say place. And what we found was that the longer the language had been understood by Google as part of the Cloud Natural Language API, the more likely they were to get idioms right. And the ones that were outside of the Cloud Natural Language API, which are smaller languages that have less machine learning, the less likely they are to get anything like that right. So that's just interesting to see where Google is and where they are not.
And to be very clear about that, French is in the API, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
So just to reassure the French, so you are understood.
Google does have an algorithm which involves creating paraphrases and understanding, which would work with your Wikipedia example of 2 passages in the same area that are close to each other.
Sorry, now I've got a question. You just mentioned Wikipedia. I'm assuming Google trained its natural language processing on Wikipedia. Is it a useful trick to go and look at Wikipedia and use co-occurrences from Wikipedia to try and encourage Google to understand, or is that an idiotic idea?
But I'm not sure that Google learned its translation and language understanding just from Wikipedia. I would say that they learned it from hreflang tags, where you say what this page says is the same as what this page says, just in 2 different languages, or in 5 different languages. So they have a Rosetta Stone, since Google is best at English, then they have a Rosetta Stone for this word in this context means the same as this word in this context in another language, and it's really rich information. We just gave them the map.
There's a big corpus of UN translations like that, multiple languages.
No, I've got nothing to add to that other than obviously just the informational nature of Wikipedia. I'd probably be looking more at competing pages on commercial terms and looking at the co-occurrence there, for example, or the semantic graph of related entities or related concepts.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much. Now, we've just run out of time. I'm afraid there's no more time for questions. Big round of applause. That was brilliant.